Okay, so my idea in life is that you should GraphQL all the things, and you should strive to try to use GraphQL in everything that you can. There are some people who have taken this to an extreme. There is this guy in Portugal called Bernardo. He made this, I think I told someone in the workshop about this. He made this thing where it allows you to create CSS with GraphQL. And it's a thing. It exists. The guy's amazing. I don't think anyone uses it, but I have stickers of it. It's a thing on the internet. It's GraphQL-CSS. Okay, so my talk is going to be about managing local state with Apollo. First of all, I really like this GIF. It's a really nice GIF. And second of all, no, that's not it. Okay, so first of all, my name's Sara. If you haven't been to my workshop, you might already know that, but fine. So my name's Sara. I'm a front-end developer and developer advocate at YLD. We're a consultancy in London and Portugal. I am really into horrible, horrible movies like Sharknado and Troll 2. I'm really into football, which is at 8 today, so thanks for that. And I've been living out of Javier's house, actually, not even an Airbnb. I'm not cool enough for that. When I'm not, I actually live in the place that has less people than the Apollo Slack, which I am not sure if that's sad for me or for the Apollo Slack. I have no idea how they manage all of that. So this is from 2011. Most of us have already evaded to Switzerland by now. So this should be about like 4,000. And this should be about like 750 or something. So yeah. So this is the actual alert. So alert, I don't like Redux. I don't like Redux. Like, I've met Dan. Dan is so nice. He's like, you can't aggravate that man, which is super weird because like, I don't know. He lives in London, and people usually I lived in London for 3 months, and I became way more angry than I was before I went to London. Public transportation ruins a person. The subway ruins you as a human being. You become so angry at everyone. It's kind of amazing. But Dan is this really nice guy who's never mad at anything. But like, I started using Redux when I started using React, so I didn't really question the fact that we were using both of them until 3 days afterwards when I realized that we were like changing like 5 files or 4 files to change an object, and I got really mad, and I didn't want to do it anymore, and I changed projects. So one thing that, weirdly enough, has happened to me is that somebody comes to me and is like, oh, we got this really awesome project. I've actually heard this for job, like people email me like, do you want a job? And they're like, oh, we're using like React and Apollo and really nice. And you know what we're using for state management? And I'm like, what? We're using Redux. And I'm like, but why though? If you've never seen this photo sitting at front-end Newcastle, my talk was after lunch. And I was like reconciling with all my life choices that led me to that moment. That was nice. Why though? I don't mean better, I mean, there are other ways you can handle this without having to shift your mentality away from GraphQL. So, GraphQL all the things again. There's this really, really nice package by the Apollo GraphQL team who can have all of my personal belongings. I will give them my car if they need to. They have given me so much happiness. That is called Apollo Link State. And what it allows you to do is exactly what Redux allows you to do, but with GraphQL. Amazing. Yay. Okay, and you're asked like, okay, that sounds like cool. I don't like Redux too. Nice. So how do you do it? Okay, so first of all, she's been over this. So Apollo Boost. So remember this. It's not. So I can't fucking remember this. I can't remember the 3 functions in Redux. So now you just yarn add Apollo Boost, GraphQL, and React Apollo, and you instantiate your stuff. So we've been over this both at the workshop and in the previous talk. But I just want to say, first of all, that the Apollo, wait, it's stuck, I got stuck. The Apollo Boost thing was mainly created by Peggy Raises, and God bless Peggy Raises, because we're so lazy and she had to fix our laziness. That is the main reason that this is a thing. So now let's manage some actual state. Okay, so with the Apollo Boost, it already comes with the client state. So the only thing that you need to add to the Apollo client is this client state thing that has the defaults and resolvers. You're like, what? I'm gonna get to that, fam. Okay, so the defaults. The defaults are your base state. So if you use Redux or MobX or anything that makes you happy, or doesn't make you happy, but you have to use it, you always have this base huge object or array or whatever the way you decide it. Unless you use MobX, you can have, that's not the point. You always start with something. And in this case, what we're going to do is open and close a modal because I am very, very creative. So what we have in our defaults is just an object. And inside of that, we have an object called modal. And we have a key called modal is open. And I set that to false so that it's not open at default. And we give it a type name. Who knows why we should give type names to things or what the fuck type names are? OK, so this is added by default when you do some request to the database or whatever. This is added by default as part of how GraphQL or Apollo manages state and how it actually knows that two things are not the same thing. So by adding this, you're actually helping Apollo and you're helping yourself because all of the stuff will get faster and Apollo will know, OK, this is the type name of modal. Just leave this alone. OK, so now we have our base state. So now let's create some resolvers. Like this is where this is all the magic happens. So this is where you're like, OK, Apollo, do this. And they're like, oh, the fuck? And you're like, I got you, fam. Here's this function. And this is where you actually pass them the function. OK. So you export if you created a GraphQL server with a node, you know that you get 3 parameters. The first one is the parent. And usually, you don't really care about the parent. 90% of the times, you don't care about the parent. I don't know why it's the first argument. It always feels like you're using Lodash, but OK. And then you get the params, which are all the things that you pass in. In this case, we're just going to open the modal, so we're not going to pass any params. And then you get all the context. And in that context, there's the cache. And this amazing thing that they did with the polling state basically just gave us access to the cache and ways to manipulate the cache. Because the way that GraphQL, that Apollo works is that all of their caching is already done. So what they gave us was like, OK, you want to change that cache and you want to manipulate your local state with this, here's access to that cache. So all we have to do is say, OK, so our new data will be modal, and modal is open equal to true. And we just say like cache.write data. And we pass it data equals this. So if you rename that to something else, you got to be like data equals your name. And I've been told that you should return null in the end of it. This is something that they are going to change up to version 1. But for now, since there is actually no return to this, you shouldn't return the cache.write data for some reason, and you should return null. This was actually told me by Peggy, so you should follow whatever she says. The mutation, OK. You know, like the GQL part of the equation, like how do you actually call this, like in schema definition language? Well, exactly like you normally would, except that there's an @ client in here. The amazing thing about this is that you can have a, for example, why did I start speaking in Portuguese? Like dual language is really hard. You can have like this huge query, and you have this, for example, you have this is favorited, and that is saved on local storage. And if you just want that to be part of the client, you can just add the @ client. And then in the resolvers, you will actually need the parent to set the part of that to true. So to set like is favorite to true or is favorite to false. So you don't actually need to have one query just for a client thing when the rest, like, for example, the way that I did this in the beginning is that I had a massive query that I would get from the database, and then I had a separate client query that I would check if it was favorited. Now I've shifted that to just get the favorited part in the query. So I get everything in one, which is really nice. OK, so how do you query these things? Well, exactly like you would, except you have the @ client. So this is the name, the key of the object that we have, and we get the key of the value that was confusing. OK, so let me go back. Oh, I don't have to. I was pointing at my own. So modal is open. That's it. OK, cool. And you add the @ client at it. And the most amazing thing is that you didn't have to write this query. This is done automatically. Because what it will do, if it has the @ client and is a query, you will go through your cache, and you will just look at the things that are the client and see if any of the objects have that key. And if they do, it's going to look inside of the object and look for the other key and give you the result of it. OK, so we made the part that is behind the scenes, but how do you actually call these things and change your local state? Query component, the best. OK, so you do it exactly like you would do with normal data. So you have a query component, you get the loading, you get the error, and you get the modal. And in there, you can deconstruct to the modal is open. And if it's loading, it shows something. If there's an error, it returns the error. And if using React modal, which has a property called modal is open, and in there I pass it true or false. So in there I pass modal is open, which will be true or false. You usually don't need the loading. I added this for clarity's sake, but if it needs to load getting your local data, you have a problem. So yeah. So your thing is like, this sounds like a lot of code because I don't remember the last time I wrote Redux, and for some reason this looks like a lot of code. Can we make this smaller? Yeah. So first part, I also did this in the workshop. Let's create our very own query component. So the query component basically calls children as a function. Since in React, children is always the thing you passed, it doesn't arrayify it or anything. So if you just create a query component, you pass it all the props, you do all the loading in here, and then you just return the children of that component with the data. You can actually use this anywhere. And the idea is that you're probably not going to have different loadings in your application. They're always going to be the same loading. And you're probably not going to have different error messages. I mean, not messages, screens, alerts, whatever you have. So you can just create one query component, and it goes from this to this, which is way nicer. So you just deconstruct the modal, and the modal is open out of the data. And there you go. So you pass modal is open, and you give it the value that you have on your local state. And it fits in one slide, which is pretty nice. Yay. But you actually have no modal because you can't fucking open it because it's false. I mean, you can if you change the, not the point. But you really have no modal. So you got to kind of mutate that state. So let's talk about the mutation component, which works the exact same way. It's so good. OK. So you pass it the open modal mutation that we just created. And in there, you get the open modal function. You also get loading and error. But like I said, you probably don't need the loading and error. And when you click the button, you just open the modal. And since I'm not using any type of parameters, it just literally opens the modal, which is pretty nice. What? So you still think it's too much code? Well, there's this thing called Apollo Consumer, which is used for very simple mutations to the cache. This was adapted from the React Context API to be used just for the cache in Apollo. It was heard of the new Context API in React, the fancy one. OK, so the Context API used to be really weird and not stable, and you were supposed to not use it. I don't know, there was an entire page about it, but then in the top said, please don't use this. So now you can use it. Everyone already did. Not the point. And it makes it way easier to change stuff in the context. So by the context, I mean your object at the top of React. You're not supposed to use this as a state management tool, but you can use this for very simple things, just toggling true or false, or something like that. OK, so in this case, we import Apollo Consumer, and as a parameter, what we receive in the function is the actual cache. So if you think about it, all that we really need to do is do what we actually did in the resolver. So we can actually delete all the resolvers that we have. Because in this case, all we're doing is set onClick, cache.write data, and we pass the data. The modal, you need to pass the data. So data modal is open equals true. Good. That's, yeah, which is really, really nice. Also, you already get the cache here. So if you have a huge object, you can just say data and then just spread over cache that data, for example. Yeah, and basically don't have to write everything. OK, but you're asking like, OK, but where is the mutation? Because if you see, we didn't import any mutation. We didn't do anything. We just did this. Well, that's the thing. It's done on the fly. You don't need to define any mutation, any GraphQL, or any resolver. If you just want to change simple things, you can just do this, which is super nice. And for small things, it works great. Don't do all your state management like this. They've warned us about this. And when the new React contest was released, now they have a warning saying, please don't make state management libraries. But yeah, it's really good for small things. OK, so now the next question is, can you make the query and mutation fit in one slide? Yeah, sure. Hold my beer. UK. OK, so the lettering is slightly small because it didn't fit on one slide. OK, so actually, one other thing, you get the client, which is the cache, in the query as well, which is dope. So for example, in this case, I have the modal, which just gets if the modal is open. And if it is, I say data.modal open for some. Yeah, OK. Data.modal open, and which is supposed to be modal is open, but OK. I've never noticed this. Kind of amazing. And I pass in all the query, I get the data. And I also get the cache. And in the cache, I do the exact thing that I did in the other one, which also works. Oh, this is, yeah. which also works. So, but the thing is, the modal doesn't close. Because there always has to be a problem, right? Okay, fine, I got you. Okay, so I'm just gonna create a helper function called change state, and I'm passing it to the value that we actually pass in, which means that this is your resolver, basically. Like this small function change state is your resolver, and this function gets the cache, which is the client, and Apollo actually tells you to refer to this as the client, and the value, which is if it's true or false, so if the modal is open or not. And all you need to do is, on click, you change the client value to true. You can also add a toggle thing. This is more for clarity's sake. I'm not saying this is the perfect code. And if the modal is open, then set it to open. And this function comes from React modal, which is on request close. So if you click X or click outside, it just says change the state of client to false. And it all fits in one slide. So as you can see, you don't need Redux. You may not need Redux.com. So this is what I wanted to show you. I think it's a brilliant way of handling client state if you already are using Apollo. If you're not using Apollo, I would say just, that's kind of weird. The idea of this is that you don't change context, and if you're not, that's kind of weird, don't do it. Use MobX or Redux, or one of the other 10. And, but if you are using Apollo, this is a great way for you not to shift context and keep using the same schema language, the same API for the data on your website and for the data that comes from the interwebs, which is nice. So I have a demo of this. I've also put the link of the slides on the meetup, so that's fine. So this is a demo of a modal closing and opening. It's great. Try it out. It's the best demo I've ever made. Okay, this is a demo which actually has variables and has remote data. It uses the Figma API. It shows a bunch of comments. It opens modals, does a bunch of things. When I was preparing for this talk, I did a bigger one. And you're like, okay, but what about Vue? I like Vue. I know this is a React meetup, but I like Vue. I've actually did a talk about using GraphQL and Apollo with Vue. And if you are a Vue person, it's at Apollo. This is actually not in the thing that I put at the meetup. So it's at apollo-vue/vue/love.now.sh. It also has a demo for client-side state. So you can use all of these things, and the components are pretty similar, but they have different names. So instead of getting child as a function, you get a template as a child. But it's pretty much the same idea, and it's pretty usable. It's really well maintained by one of the core contributors to Vue, so it's also really nice. And that's it. That's my talk. That's what I wanted to show you. And if you have any questions, please hit me up. If you're not very at English, you can ask Javier, and you will tell me what you mean. So.
That was awesome.
That was not the point. This was the point. Please. Thanks. Any questions? I never know if I did a good or a horrible job because there are no questions. It's always like a one in between. Yeah. Thanks, man. God bless you.
So as soon as you write something in the cache, the components automatically render?
Yeah. It's like a state. It's like all the component state, basically, yeah. So if you change something, you don't have to like trigger an action or anything. If you ever use MobX or something, which is like, it's like observable. So if you change something, it's like changing something in your component state, it will automatically trigger a re-render, which is nice. It can have some side effects if you don't keep it in touch, but it's usually nice. Yeah.
Can you have some types in the client fields?
There's going to be implemented, I think, in version 1. They still don't have types for the schema definition in the front end. But I think that's going to be implemented in version 1. That's one of the things they really want to do. And I think it's going to be optional because the thing is, for you to do that, you have to import the GraphQL.js. And that's a pretty huge library. So they're trying to figure out a way where they can make that smaller and also make it optional so that if people don't really want to import that, they don't have to. But it's probably coming on version 1. They just had a meeting about version 1, so it should be soon. I'm sorry, to encrypt queries?
Yes, between client and server.
I mean, I've never had to do that. You can create something that encrypts it on one end, and then the server decrypts it and then sends it to wherever you want to send it. I've never had to do that, but I would say that it's, so the way you could encrypt is the same way that the Apollo does the cache, which is give it a unique ID and then just write some function like an MD5 function or whatever you want to encrypt it and send it back, and then before sending it to the actual server that it is on the GraphQL layer, just decrypt the query and then send it to the right position. But I've never had to do that, so there's actually a pretty cool thing. I'll try to see what I can do with that. Nice project. Yeah, sure.
Do you keep all your queries in the same directory?
I'm sorry, keep my queries where?
Do you keep the code for your queries in the same directory?
Usually I have a directory called queries, and usually I name them all with uppercase. I don't know why. I'm not sure that is a really good practice or not. I got used to that because of constants.
That's something on the website of Apple.
It is?
Yeah.
It's a good practice. You should do it. Yeah, so I usually name them like that and get them out of queries. But I think that's totally up to you. I would not keep them on the same file because I've tried to do that. It gets really messy. It gets like a huge file. Because I also install components, so you get like the query, the CSS, and then the, yeah. Really, really huge. Any more questions? I got this. Any more questions? I have some. No? Good? Want pizza? Yeah? Hungry? Okay, cool. Let's go.
Thanks again.